There's a smell that shows up right before it rains, and almost everyone recognizes it instantly, even if they've never once heard its actual name. That smell isn't random. Your brain is unusually good at detecting it, and there's a real evolutionary reason why. In 1964, two Australian researchers, Isabel Baer and Richard Thomas, finally gave that smell a name, petrichor, built from Greek words meaning stone and the blood of the gods. What they discovered is that the smell isn't coming from the rain itself, it comes from the ground. During dry periods, soil bacteria called actinomycetes produce a compound called geosmin, which slowly builds up in dry earth and rock. When a raindrop hits that dry ground, it kicks up a tiny burst of trapped air, carrying microscopic particles of geosmin into the air where your nose can pick it up. The heavier and more sudden the rainfall after a dry spell, the stronger that unmistakable smell becomes, which is exactly why it hits hardest after a long drought breaks. What's interesting is that this recognition isn't limited to any one culture or language. Long before petrichor became the accepted scientific term, plenty of languages already had their own distinct word or phrase for exactly this smell, completely independently of each other. In parts of India, the word matti ka adar refers specifically to the scent of first rain on dry earth, tied closely into local perfume-making traditions. Similar standalone descriptions of the smell before rain show up across unrelated language families on different continents, with no shared origin connecting them. That kind of independent, repeated recognition across cultures that never had contact with one another is usually a strong sign that something real and consistently detectable is going on, rather than a smell that only a few people happen to notice. Here's the part that should surprise you. Human beings are remarkably good at detecting geosmin. Some research suggests better than sharks are at detecting blood in the water, at least by concentration. Estimates put human sensitivity to geosmin at somewhere around 5 parts per trillion, an amount so small it's genuinely difficult to picture. For comparison, that's roughly 1 drop of the compound diluted into enough water to fill several Olympic swimming pools, and most people would still catch it. Sharks, often held up as the gold standard of animal smell, are typically cited as detecting blood at concentrations in the range of 1 part per several million, meaning geosmin detection in humans sits at a far, far smaller threshold by comparison. That level of sensitivity doesn't happen by accident in a sense organ. Noses that sensitive to one specific, narrow compound usually exist because detecting it mattered enormously at some point in a species' history, not because it happened to be a pleasant smell to notice. For most of human history, water wasn't something you turned on with a tap. Finding it, especially in dry regions, could be the difference between survival and a slow, dangerous search across open land. A compound that signals rain has just touched down here, or is about to, is effectively a long-range early warning system for water. Geosmin can travel on wind well beyond the area where rain actually fell, meaning a nose sensitive enough to catch it could, in theory, detect a distant rainstorm, and the fresh water and fertile ground that came with it, long before any other evidence was visible. In an environment where missing a water source could cost days of travel or worse, a sharp nose for this exact smell would have been a genuine survival advantage, not a coincidence. There's a striking real-world example that supports this idea, and it isn't even human. Some researchers studying desert-adapted animals, camels in particular, have proposed that these animals may be able to detect geosmin or related rain-associated compounds from many miles away, effectively smelling their way toward distant water sources across otherwise featureless desert. If an animal that size can orient its entire migration around catching this scent on the wind, it becomes a lot easier to believe that early humans, moving through similarly unpredictable, water-scarce landscapes, would have benefited from the exact same sensitivity. It's not that ancient humans consciously understood bacteria or chemistry. It's that the ones whose noses happened to catch this signal more easily simply had better odds of finding water first. This isn't just a theory built in a lab either. Several desert-dwelling cultures have long documented traditions of predicting incoming rain by scent alone, well before any modern meteorology existed. Bedouin communities in parts of the Arabian Desert and various Aboriginal groups across the Australian outback have been recorded describing a distinct rain smell, carried on shifting wind patterns, often used alongside cloud shape and wind direction to judge how far off a storm actually was, and whether it was worth moving the group toward it. None of this required understanding bacteria or chemistry. It required generations of people paying close attention to a real physical signal, passing that knowledge on, and treating a sensitive nose for this exact smell as a genuinely useful survival skill, not a curiosity. This is where the story gets interesting, because the pleasant, nostalgic feeling most people report when they smell rain isn't necessarily the same thing as the original survival mechanism. Some researchers argue the detection ability itself is likely ancient and biological, while the emotional warmth attached to it may be layered on top through personal memory and repeated positive association, rain ending a hot day, the relief of a storm breaking a drought, childhood memories tied to specific weather. In other words, you may have inherited the sensitive detector from deep evolutionary history, while the good feeling that comes with it is closer to a happy accident of conditioning, built on top of a much older, purely practical survival signal. It's worth being honest about the limits of this story too. Petrichor as a named, culturally recognized concept is genuinely recent, coined in 1964, which means most of human history passed without anyone consciously identifying or discussing this smell the way we do now. The evolutionary argument for why humans are sensitive to geosmin is a reasonable, evidence-supported hypothesis, but it isn't fully proven the way something like basic color vision is. Some researchers point out that many mammals across very different evolutionary paths and habitats also detect geosmin strongly, which complicates any story built specifically around ancient human survival, since it may instead reflect something older and more general across many species entirely, rather than something that evolved specifically for us. It's entirely possible this sensitivity predates humans altogether, inherited from a much older common ancestor shared with many other mammals, in which case the story isn't really about what makes humans special at all, but about a very old survival tool that simply never stopped being useful. None of that makes the smell any less real or any less worth noticing. The next time rain hits dry pavement or dry soil near you, what you're smelling is a genuinely ancient chemical signal, produced by bacteria that have been doing this exact same thing for a very long time, detected by a nose that may have been quietly shaped by how useful that signal once was. You're not imagining the reaction. You're not being overly sentimental about weather. There's a real chance you're noticing something that once told your ancestors exactly where to walk next. A smell most people never think twice about turns out to be carrying a genuinely old story about survival, water, and a sense that might be sharper than you ever realized. That's the kind of hidden thread this channel exists to dig up, the parts of being human that go back a lot further than we usually stop to consider. If you want more of these, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.